Happy Friday, and thanks for tuning into RadioFreeRhinecliff.org and this show in particular. Correct me, I'm Norm. I'm your host, Norm. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with Dr. Professor Karen Sullivan of the Hamlet.
I like that Dr. Professor. It sounds so German.
It's good. It's like the right reverend or something.
Yeah.
And do you have a preference regarding what your article is or whatever they call it? Is it Professor or Ms. or Doctor?
Whatever. I always say whatever you're comfortable with, which I realize is the wrong response. People actually want some direction. But tough luck. You have to make up your own mind.
People do want direction. When did you realize that people want direction in almost everything?
My students often made it very clear. I mean, I thought it would be liberatory. You can choose whatever you want, but no, people want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
They do. And that segues right into the current topic of the political state of this country.
Oh, my God.
People being told what to do. And people are happy to be told what to do. And
some people are, not me. Mm-hmm.
Not you.
No.
Well, that's good. and you've done all kinds of wonderful things in your career. This is your second time here in the show.
Yes.
First time we just sort of talk in general about your expertise. And then, because it's Halloween, Matt said, well, in addition to everything else, Dr. Professor Karen Sullivan is also an enthusiastic scholar of the Salem Witch Trials.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. I enjoy them.
And so I thought maybe I could just ask you about that, and then I could sit back and listen for the rest of the show.
Okay. That'd be great. And I can talk about Halloween, too, if you want
good.
to talk about whatever. The Salem Witch Trials is whatever you like.
Let's start with Halloween.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe actually it could be a good background for talking about the Salem Witch Trials, because Halloween has a kind of long history. It's a pagan history. It goes back to Ireland. I have to say, as Karen Sullivan, I kind of take pride in, this. But basically in pagan Ireland, there was a pantheon of gods, and they were called the Tuath de Dana, which means the people of the goddess Danu. And they were kind of a great group of gods and goddesses. I won't go through all of them. But what's kind of confusing is that they were thought of as being gods and goddesses, beautiful, kind of immortal, ageless. But they're also thought of as being kind of like human beings. They are a tribe, a people, a Tuath. And they arrive in Ireland in a mist, which I think is really cool.
On a mist?
In a mist, exactly.
Okay.
Or a cloud, depending on how you want to translate it.
Yeah.
And so they're there for a while. They're kind of one of the, there's a whole long series of the invaders of Ireland. But then the Milesians show up. And the Milesians, or the children of Meal, are basically the Gaelic Irish, the people we now know as the Irish. So they first show up. And so there's a kind of war between the Tuath de Dana and the Milesians. And as a result of this conflict, the Tuath de Dana literally go underground. They go into they also become known as the Sidhe. It's spelled S-I-D or S-I-D-H-E, given how confusing Irish is. But you think of a banshee. A banshee is a woman she, but that's kind of where the word comes from. And so the Sidhe are basically what we know as the fairy folk. So references you have to fairies really all go back, to the Sidhe. As I say, they literally go underground in what are called the Sidhe mounds or the fairy mounds, and so they're kind of living under the ground. They may also go across the Western Sea, or they may reside in our own land, but unseen, to us. There's a kind of line, where kind of St. Patrick, says about them that Patrick will put the Tuath de Dana into the steep slopes of hills and rocks. Though you may occasionally see them in an apparition, one of the doomed visiting Earth. So this is kind of the idea. They kind of live in the earth, in the steep slopes of hills and rocks, but you can see them sometimes. And so when do you see them? You see them.
I'm raising my hand. I have a question.
Okay.
You said they're living in the sides of hills and rocks. And I think there's like a World Heritage Site where there's all these sort of like dwellings that are in mounds on the sides of hills and rocks. Exactly. Is that related to this?
Yeah, it's very much the case. But all around Ireland, you can kind of see places where that would be identified with the Sidhe, or kind of these Sidhe mounds. Even something like Newgrange, the kind of famous kind of Neolithic kind of, a passage tomb. That was well maybe well before the pyramids were constructed, but it does get identified with the Sidhe.
Interesting.
So there are places where you can see them, and for example, Newgrange, which is in the Bourne Valley, you can kind of visit. It's actually kind of scary to go to. So there are certain places where you can see them, but there are also certain times when you can see them. And these are the 4 great Celtic holidays. Imbolc, which is February, which is the origin of our Groundhog's Day. Lunas Beltane, which is in the beginning of May, like the 1st of May, with the pastoral season when the herds come out. Lunas identified with kind of Lu, one of the gods. This is in August, the beginning of the harvest season, and most importantly, Samhain, which is another kind of a harvest holiday identified with the end of summer. And it was celebrated with a great ceremony at Tara, which is kind of the center of Ireland. Actually quite nearby. Newgrange. They would have it would last for 3 days. There would be bonfires. There would be kind of a beacon. People would kind of make bonfires made from the fire. And so there would be bonfires all throughout Ireland. All started from the fire at Tara. And there would be a harvest feast. Pigs would be slaughtered, before the winter. So this is a moment of transition, between fall and winter, between light and darkness, when the days start to get really dark. It's connected with death. And so, this is obviously the origin of Halloween. Here, this is the time of Halloween.
And I'm just going to guess that people did begin to die then. That over the cold, hard winter.
They would. They certainly would, kind of after this. But this is the moment when you kind of live it up and before the kind of winter really starts. And you have a feast. There are some scholars who think they would have had more alcohol, depending on other times of the year, which kind of contributes to the festivities. But this is, what's called a thin time. It's a time when the portal between the human beings and the she is open, when you can kind of go back and forth. And so there are lots of kind of texts that we have, from the kind of pagan Irish tradition. They're all written down by Christians because they had writing. But they kind of talk about Samhain. They talk about things that would happen, at this time. They're like Finn McCool was one of the great Irish heroes. At Samhain, there was a very beautiful maiden on the She Mound, and this is her name. The men of Ireland were in a feud about her. One man after another went to woo her. Every year in Samhain, the wooing used to take place. For the She Mounds of Ireland were always opened around Samhain. Or on Samhain, nothing could ever be hidden in the She Mound. So that's in a quotation from a 12th century kind of text. I could give you kind of other stories as well.
What does that mean, nothing can be hidden in the She Mounds?
That the she cannot be kept in the She Mounds.
Okay.
They emerge at this time. And you can enter into the She Mound and they can kind of come out. So there's this kind of point of connection between the fairy folk and the human beings. So I can give you kind of other stories kind of about them. But I think you have a sense. It's a spooky time.
Yeah.
And especially because they would sometimes kind of prey on human beings and steal human children and take them into their She Mounds. And
right. And are there groups of Irish that still believe in the she, that still think they're around?
If you call it belief, but it's a very complicated issue, and I think it often depends how you want to define belief.
Right.
Certainly, like in the late 19th, early 20th century, when people like W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory were running around, you had the kind of the Celtic revival, all these collections of Irish mythology and writing down of these stories, and so there were even kind of very educated people, who this is also a time of the occult, so
right.
People even like Yeats was very involved in the occult, and so they believed in kind of these non-Christian forces, these forces that cannot be defined, by regular kind of religion.
Right.
But there was actually at that time a case. Someone wrote a whole book about this. Bridget Cleary, this woman, kind of a peasant woman, she was more educated than her husband. There was some conflict between them. She became sick. But he became convinced she had been taken away by the fairies and replaced by an imposter, a changeling.
Right.
And so they killed her, because they thought, that if they killed her, then the real Bridget Cleary would come back. he supposedly kind of waited in the darkness, for 3 nights for someone to arrive on a white horse, returning to him as true life. So kind of that, was in the early part of the 20th century. But of course, there are Wiccans, there are neo-pagans, there are, people, who do practice this. I mean, I'm from, the North Shore of Boston, and a part, that was called Salem Village, so, my father used to kind of date a woman who was a Wiccan, so there are lots of kind of witches, people call themselves witches in Salem. My mother once sold insurance to a coven of witches, which I thought was very paradoxical.
Why
do they need insurance? But anyway, so there are plenty of kind of people who practice Wicca, today, who would very much identify with this tradition.
And were you ever tempted with any of that supernatural kind of stuff?
I kind of wish I were, but
it can be common for like 13-year-olds, especially. Like a 13-year-old girl, my big sister, for example, to be sort of lured into that world.
When I was a child, my mother would bring us. There was a store in Salem, the town of Salem, which is a beautiful city nowadays, and there was a town there where they sold children's clothes, and that's where my mother would take us for children's clothes. But there was a statue of, and it wasn't even a witch, it was a statue of a Puritan, but I was so terrified to go to Salem as a small child.
Because of the lore?
Yes, exactly. Well, just because, oh my God, that's where the witches live, it's so scary. And then there was the fairy statue, and so it was very terrifying, so.
And I think that's probably part of the dynamic why people get fascinated by that.
Yeah.
To the lore, it's like, well, it's scary, and if I'm a part of it, then I'll own it instead of being scared by it.
Well, there's a pleasure in being scared. I think anyone in kind of participates in Halloween or watches horror movies can identify with that pleasure. But it's a thin line, right, in between the pleasure and the pain.
Yeah, which brings up this word used earlier, a thin time, which was whereas that world, the other world, the netherworld, and our real world were closer together.
Exactly.
And the line between them
you could cross between them. That was the idea.
Yeah, love that. And was there some idea that this time of year that Halloween Samhain, whatever you call it?
Samhain, yeah. No, this was the one of the 4 great Celtic holidays, and so all of the kind of Celtic holidays are thin times. But this was very much a time when the dead would come back. I mean, let it be added, there is a kind of Christian kind of aspect to this as well. I mean, what I'm talking about is the kind of pagan version. But if you think of the word Halloween, well, what does the word Halloween come from? So it goes back to All Hallows Eve.
Right.
Well, what does that mean? Well, hallow means holy. It also originally kind of meant saint. So this is a reference to All Saints' Day, which is November 1st.
Right.
And so, for the Christian holidays and with Jewish holidays, lots of holidays, they start in the evening beforehand, like there's Christmas Eve, Christmas, the Easter Vigil, Easter, and the same was true in the Celtic, tradition, here. So even, so the eve before All Saints' Day is Halloween, and so All Saints' Day is a kind of a day of veneration of the saints. Then it's followed, by All Souls' Day, the day after, where you get this veneration of all people who've died. So in the Christian tradition as well, this time period is identified, with the dead.
Right. There. Well, they got a great history of co-opting existing holidays and making them their own.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how did it go? Tell me again, it was Sow? Is that what you were saying?
Samhain. If I tell you how it was spelled, you would think that there's nothing to do with Samhain. Nothing at all what it sounds like. It looks like Samhain.
So how did that become what we now celebrate as Halloween? What was the...
See, that's where it gets kind of complicated, and there are so many kind of different threads. Here. I mean, the simple answer to it is that there are lots of Irish and Scottish immigrants to America. And they were the people who kind of brought, these traditions there. I mean, actually, I should kind of make clear, it's not that the Irish were kind of pagans. I mean, actually, they became Christian in the 5th century. But the tradition of celebrating something at this time of the year kind of remained with them. And so there were lots of, ways in which one celebrates things. Bonfires was kind of there to the very beginning. Other kind of getting drunk, kind of having festivities. I mean, this is kind of an important part of kind of lots of traditions. Carving up turnips, was there from the Irish tradition. They didn't have pumpkins. Pumpkins are a New World, kind of crop.
Right.
But they did carve, make faces out of turnips, there.
Did they hollow them out somehow?
Yeah. They did. I mean, turnips aren't that big, but they would make little faces out of them, little basic jack-o'-lantern turnips,
I love that.
I mean, apples right in front of this time of the year. Obviously, apples are in season at this time.
Right.
So bobbing for apples, but something you would do. Fortune telling, was something that became very much identified with this time of the year. So all of these types of festivities, would be, identified with a kind of harvest festival.
Right.
So a harvest festival, it's a time of transition, kind of right now. And so you have, a harvest festival to kind of celebrate that. And so, there were these traditions that were there. They were celebrated in lots of different ways. But then they get identified particularly with this, with October 31st. And as I say, it's particularly coming from the Irish and the Scots, And then the English, the Victorians adopted really as because obviously they're owning Ireland and Scotland, but for them it was originally a children's festival. Have a children's party. You would kind of have these things for children, like bobbing for apples. But then it's really America that gets going with this.
Yeah.
And so America, I think all of it has to do with consumerism, Halloween cards, candy manufacturers, originally for children. But then at a certain period, adults started really liking it as well. And they kind of joined into it. I mean, one shouldn't discount the importance of gay men, for example, in the Castro, in San Francisco, in New York City, in the Greenwich Village. So there were kind of horror movies, become very popular from the 1950s on, obviously often having Halloween as a feature. Interest in horror in general, ghost stories, we like to be spooked out in all sorts of ways, ghost tours, so Wicca, so there are all these kind of different threads that come together in America, and they've been developing over our lifetime. I mean, I think we've seen the difference in that. And then what's interesting is that in recent years, and now it's spread back, now in England, they're really celebrating it, even though it's coming from America, in Asia, I mean, kind of all over the world, people are celebrating this holiday based upon American influence.
What do you think the allure is? I mean, deep down.
Well, people like it. It depends. I think it's one of these holidays that people either really, really like it or they really, don't like it. So some people really like to dress up. Some people love to kind of adopt an alternate persona.
Yeah.
And it can be like a fun thing, or it can be an attractive thing, like your alter ego. I mean, it can be all sorts of things. Some people really enjoy that. Some people hate that.
And do you traditionally dress up for Halloween?
I don't, but just because my neighbors don't. If my neighbors did, I probably would, because I did once have a kind of Halloween party. I'm usually so busy at this time of the year, but I would love to. I mean, I do enjoy it. I mean, if we lived in a civilization, or I lived in a civilization where they had masquerade parties, I would love it. But unfortunately, academics tend to be very serious people. We only dress up for commencement.
Oh, jeez, and that doesn't count.
No, it doesn't. I enjoy that. I take what I can get.
We probably have like special sashes that mean things and honorary.
It's one of the major advantages of having a PhD. You get to wear, this elaborate costume,
right.
Kind of every year.
And is that just once a year you get to wear that elaborate costume?
Yeah. But we enjoy it, and we like to parade around in them. And the students, parents take pictures of us, and so we make of it what we can. I had my druthers. I'd wear it to class every day. But
wear what?
If I could do what I wanted, I would wear it to class every day.
Right.
But I think there would be a little unusual. Okay.
I think the kids would love that. I think the students would get they'd have a field day with that.
They certainly would.
Let's say.
They certainly would.
Yeah. Well, so did you grow up dressing up for Halloween?
Oh, of course. I think most American kids do, unless they're
I did. I was born in 1960, and I don't remember any Halloween of my youth that I didn't get dressed up. Mm-hmm. And I wonder when that really took off in the U.S. Any idea?
I mean, the 1950s, I think, is where it really takes off. The suburbs help, for this. So, consistent, you see kind of, it really kind of how, and the whole idea of Christmas, of children's parties, there's a whole kind of new culture kind of revolving around children at that time, and the post-war prosperity. People
Right.
are spending more time with, kind of, focused on their kids, and,
Right.
this kind of one way, capitalism, people kind of making, these costumes, candy,
Right.
the commercialization of it, all of these things kind of come
You
together.
mentioned
at that time.
post-war prosperity. Made me wonder if during really good times people want to be scared more.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've always wondered, like, why, in post-war Britain, you saw this explosion of detective stories. I mean, like Agatha Christie, and that's the golden age of detective stories.
Right.
And all these little villages that are so quaint, and like, oh man, there are like murders happening every day, according to these stories. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting question when people, I mean, listen, I'm a medievalist. And so as a medievalist, I had, if you work on Old Norse sagas, for example, they're incredibly spooky. They're just terrifying. I actually had a very brilliant student, a college student, who wrote a senior project about, about horror and Old Norse sagas. And actually one of the great specialists in the person who wrote one of the most important books on horror movies, Carol Clover, is a specialist in Old Norse literature. So you can find everything. You can find spooky ghosts haunting people. You can find vampires,
Monsters.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can find everything you want for horror. You can find in an Old Norse saga, except it was really happening, and it was genuinely terrifying to people.
Right.
But so it's interesting to read these sagas now with my students because we kind of enjoy reading about it. But even the Halldór Laxness, the Icelander who kind of won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he writes a novel about kind of 20th century Iceland, and it is terrifying, utterly terrifying, in a very kind of spooky way. I mean,
such as.
It's about this one homestead in impoverished 20th century Iceland, and at a certain, and there's kind of an irascible kind of man, and he has this wife, and they have all these kids, and it's kind of a mess, and they're like starving, and it was very tough to live in Iceland during those years. But then the animals start all dying. They keep on dying, the farm animals, and no one can figure out they keep on being killed. And it's uncertain, like what's happening to why are the throats of the farm animals getting the sheep and they're kind of getting
Sounds
killed.
like a Stephen King book.
It is very Stephen King, except you come to the conclusion it was the son who was killing them.
Peter Schaefer.
Yeah, well, everyone dies of, everyone is dying of tuberculosis. I mean, the novel kind of ends with like everyone dead of tuberculosis aside from the man and his eldest daughter, who's actually illegitimate and not his daughter, and some like ancient crone. But the daughter has, tuberculosis. I mean, it's terrible. It's terrible. And so the horror there, is not a fun horror. I mean, I think it was actually very close to the life of of course, what country writes the best detective stories around today? Right, it's Iceland.
Really?
Oh my God!
I had
Icelandic
no-
noir. It's
I
like the
had no
Nordic
idea.
noir. It's like the best thing
Icelandic
ever.
noir.
Oh, I tell you,
Nordic
it is
noir.
so good. It is so good.
Oh, that's amazing.
Sigurdur Sram, best, kind of, most terrifying, murder mystery writer around.
Wow, what's the name?
Ursa, YRSA, Sigurdur Strom. I'm sorry, getting this wrong. Sigurdur's daughter. I mean, it's a patronym.
Sigurd's daughter. Yeah.
Sigurd, I mean, it's a genitive of Sigurd, and then the ending daughter.
Sure.
The daughter of Sigurd.
Magnusson.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But they gave up that naming convention when the Swedes anyway.
Yeah.
Like when they moved here anyway. I think.
Yeah, no, the Icelanders still have patronyms. They still use them, or sometimes matronyms.
What would you say? Patronyms.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Interesting. And matronyms. So back to Halloween as it's practiced here, I can sort of understand how being in a costume would really prosper. It would happen. It would burgeon, and people would do it more and more because of commercialism. Mm-hmm. Is there a historical precedent for that?
Well, the aristocratic households of when I say kind of 18th, 19th, 20th century Europe. I mean, they love to have masquerade parties, and they spent enormous amounts of kind of money, on their costumes.
Right.
So there's if you think of Carnival, for example, particularly something like Venetian Carnival, and the
Right.
kind of absolutely gorgeous and historical costumes they have there. But there's a long tradition that goes way, way back. So that's going to be a aristocratic version of these elaborate costumes. But there's a long tradition of mumming. And that's often the word that's used. I have a kind of
Mumming?
Mumming is when you kind of just dress up in a costume and you can go around and terrorize people.
Right.
I mean, Louisiana, which is a state I'm particularly fond of. I mean, of course, they have their own tradition of Mardi Gras, which does involve costumes. And there's, you can see it both in New Orleans itself, but you can also see it in Cajun country, where there's a very kind of traditional way of kind of practicing this, where they dress up in these, incredible kind of costumes, and they get on their horses and they go from door to door, asking for ingredients for making a gumbo. And the best ingredient they need to get is a live chicken, But the person with the live chicken isn't just going to give them a live chicken; they're going to throw the chicken at them. So they have to, chase the chicken on their horse in their costume, and they're all drunk. It's really it seems like a huge amount of fun. And then they make the gumbo. So if you look at the elements of that, kind of dressing up, going door to door, asking for things, having some kind of, being given something, those are kind of all elements we might identify with Halloween. But you see them in a lot of different places, like in Mardi Gras, which is a
Right.
totally fun time of the year.
Also makes me think of sort of like, Haitian island and
Exactly.
voodoo elements.
Absolutely. And there's a very strong Haitian influence, upon Louisiana.
Right.
Ever since the 18th century.
Right. And in many of those rituals, people like really dress up a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just really
Yeah.
curious, how did it come to pass that the first person dressed up here in the U.S. for Halloween? And also another thought, the classic costume is a pillowcase with eyes cut in, and you're a ghost.
Oh,
And
I don't think you want to go there, because there was 1 year when the Ku Klux Klan was being prosecuted, and they made a defense of themselves by claiming it was like a Halloween costume.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So there are lots of as I say, there is a long tradition in kind of in New England, kind of young people kind of dressing up, mumming, going door to door, demanding, basically kind of trick or treats. But it was often very scary. I mean, it was often considered hooligans. There were laws against it. They would do pranks. I mean, they would vandalize things.
The trick.
Yeah,
Trick
I know,
part.
but I mean, now it's very benign. But back in the day, it was not benign. I mean, people would be, it would be a lot of trouble, there. And then,
Right.
and this is, this is the tradition that goes back into Europe. It was often the people doing it are having a great time, but the people who are dealing with, they may be enjoying it, and they may be totally terrified, or they just may find it really awful.
And was there some sort of like class demarcation?
Yeah, very much a class
Because as you
war.
described,
This
when
is
like the
working
people
class.
who own a home are going to be
Yeah.
afraid, and the people who aren't owning a home
Yeah.
are going around and it's like tricking people.
Exactly. No, so this is something you would very much identify with working class people, which is again something that would be kind of part of what was kind of frightening about it.
Right.
Here.
So could there be something here in the U.S. where the working class people gather together and trick the billionaires, and the billionaires are afraid?
Are you proposing that?
I'm just curious.
I suppose we could, but I suspect that the Elon Musk of the world are not going to be that thrilled.
Yeah.
But as I say, I mean, what we recognize as Halloween is really very, very benign compared to kind of what happened before. It's like trick or treat. I mean, everyone knows that they're not going to cause much trouble at all. They're little kids dressed up like dinosaurs.
The worst thing is, your trees, your house gets toilet papered.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only thing that would really happen.
And now I got to ask, when you were a kid, did you do any of the tricking stuff? I mean, throw an egg on a neighbor's roof or toilet paper somebody's tree?
Point out that boys are much more likely to do such things than girls are.
You may, but that's not a successul dodge of the question.
No, I didn't. I was not a naughty girl,
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of that going on where I lived, for better or for worse,
Right, which was the north side of Boston up towards Salem.
And yes, exactly.
So back to Salem.
Yes.
Can we talk some more
Totally.
about...
I love one of my favorite topics is the Salem Witch Trials.
Oh, good. Well, go.
Oh my God. Okay, no, you ask me a question. What do you want to know?
All right, yeah. I looked it up a little bit online. One of the things that came up was reasons for the witch trials.
Yeah.
Reasons for all
this
that.
is very contested. And I
the
have my own view.
Reasons were possessions of Elizabeth Parris and Abigail Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And possible, and I loved this, was ergo or ergot poisoning.
Yeah.
And,
I don't believe that one.
Oh, too bad.
Sorry.
Yeah. All right.
People often say that, and people say that for like visionaries in medieval Europe.
Yeah, because the ergot has like the lysergic acid in it, which is the main ingredient in lysergic acid diethylamine, which is LSD.
But why would it only affect a group of adolescent girls?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I'm just...
No. This is one of the great, kind of questions of American history. So why did this happen? I mean, first of all, there were lots of witchcraft. This was, this is part of the witch craze, kind of in Europe. I mean, it started in the late 15th century. It goes, through the 17th century. This is kind of the end of it when we kind of go into it in Salem. And so it's happening in lots of places, and interestingly, kind of both in Catholic, countries and in Protestant countries. And it's very hard to come up with one answer, kind of why this happened, because you see it in all different types of countries. You see it, as I said, Catholic, Protestant, rural, urban. I mean, you see it in the New World. So, but if you look at Salem in particular, there have been many kind of witch prosecutions in New England before, they kind of happened in Salem. But Salem was particularly so much happened in such a short period of time, and it's very well documented. It was very, so it's tended to be something that we're really fascinated by. So the various theories are, one theory is the Salemers were like a quarrelsome lot. There was a lot of trouble going on in kind of Salem village for a long time. They had a whole series of ministers whom they gotten rid of and had fights with. They had a new minister. They didn't want to pay him. So there were lots of disputes about property lines. So there's one kind of theory. It all has to do with kind of a fight over property, that's getting kind of ventriloquated, by the daughters. So that's one theory. I'll tell you my theory. I like my theory the best.
That's good.
Well, I think one factor is, and I don't think people have actually kind of pursued this enough. A lot of it had, this is colonial New England. Up in Falmouth, Maine, which is now known as Portland, Maine, there had been a Native American raid, and the whole town had been destroyed, and a huge number of people had been massacred. Kind of one of the major accusers in Salem, her parents had been killed in that raid. The current minister, in Paris, Reverend Parris, at Salem had come from there, and so there was a lot of exchange between Salem and Falmouth, Maine, and so there was a lot of fear of Native Americans. A lot of the testimonies that people would give about the devil at this time, there's a kind of overlap between descriptions of the devil and description of Native Americans. Salem wasn't a frontier town. It wasn't like Deerfield, or something like that. But there still was a lot of fear. And as I say, people who had suffered what we would call trauma, there. So there's both, internal conflict. There's external kind of fear, and then there's my theory, which I'm hardly the only person to bring this up, but I really do think that this is the crucial issue. It has to do with a legal shift that had happened, and it had actually happened a couple of years beforehand, in 1662 in England. There was one case in England, in Bury St. Edmunds, of witchcraft, the accusations of it. And the legal question was whether you should accept what's called spectral evidence. And spectral evidence, there's like evidence of witchcraft. We can, like, my cow just died. So this woman walked by and we had a fight, and then my cow dropped dead, after that. So that type of evidence, or, it's obviously all circumstantial. Or this old woman, gave my baby the evil eye, and then the baby developed colic. Whatever. But spectral evidence, if it is a different order. Spectral evidence is like, Norm, there's a little bird on your shoulder, and it's speaking to your ear, and I see it. It's telling you kind of what to do.
Right.
And no one else can see the little yellow bird on your shoulder, but I see it.
Right.
And so the question is whether this is admissible as evidence in a court of law.
Uh-huh. And did they accept this in the witch trials?
There was a very important German jurist whose name is Hale. And he's John Hale, and he's become very, believe this or not, And 2 years ago, Benedict Cumberbatch played him on a Saturday Night Live sketch because he actually kind of made he had passed a decision about abortion that kind of the Supreme Court justices kind of cited in overturning Roe v. Wade. So he's kind of famous in America for that. But anyway, this kind of famous, kind of jurist, Hale, it said, this evidence was admissible. And so once he says this, there's this famous English jurist, one of the most famous, jurists of all of, English, juridical history, that goes, back, over to New England, and that's influencing what people are kind of doing in New England. So now this gets admissible. But you can see the trouble that this is, the source of all the trouble. You have kind of these girls who are all, saying there's a little bird, they're all kind of seeing these things that no one else is seeing. And they're all also, having fits or having their body contorted in terrible, twisted ways and showing other signs of kind of distress. And so this, their perceptions and their suffering is taken as evidence of witchcraft.
Right.
And it's on that basis, that people are convicted. After they kind of turn, the courts of law in New England changed their mind about this and ceased to accept this as evidence, no one else is convicted of witchcraft.
Right. And if convicted, what was the punishment usually?
So 19 people were executed, were hanged.
Okay.
And one person was pressed to death,
right.
Giles Corey.
Now, you see this thing in popular culture in movies, in Scooby-Doo, for example, where there's a chair. Somebody's put in a chair on the end of a long stick, and they're dunked in the water. And it's
dunking.
If they sink, they're not guilty.
Yeah, exactly.
No, if they sink, they're guilty. If they float, they're... vice versa.
The other way around. This is called the trial by God, and it goes back, to, it actually has Germanic origins. It's not at all Christian in its origins, but it was very popular in the Middle Ages, and so I'm always running it and dealing with the trial by God. And the two major versions here are the trial by fire, the trial by water. There are some other more amusing versions, but what you were talking about is the trial by water.
Right.
But the notion is that, the four elements are all pure entities, and as pure entities, they will identify the innocent or the guilty.
Right.
And so that's why if you throw an innocent person into the water, they will sink because the water will receive them. But if it's a guilty person, the water will reject them.
Right. So the person dies either way.
No, they actually were. And it's funny because it's funny that I find all of my students know about this.
I'm telling you, Scooby-Doo.
Probably, I don't know. I've always interested. Like, where did they get this from? And they all think that they would let them die, but that actually wasn't the case. And they would tie a rope around someone's waist, tie it so they couldn't swim, obviously. And then so the question is, so what happens if you throw someone into water?
Well, it depends. If you know how to swim, they can't swim. Their arms are kind of tied up. So if you throw, and their legs are tied up, so they can't swim. But if you throw a body into water, into a big kind of container of water, what's the first thing that's going to happen? Well, if I were thrown in, I would just try to keep my mouth above the water and breathe in deeply.
Yeah, you can't do that. The water's too deep. You can't
increase my buoyancy.
You can't float. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, you're being very clever. But listen, I would advise you. Remember, I would advise you not to do that because that would be a sign you were guilty, right?
Okay.
So normally a body will sink.
Yeah.
And then it will float. And so the question is, they're tied to a rope. The question is when you start pulling them up.
Yeah.
So it's often thought this is a type of communal kind of judgment.
Right.
If the community kind of in charge of this, kind of thinks the person,
right. Do they feel like pulling them up soon?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's an unconscious judgment.
And was this trial by water? Did that happen in Salem?
No, it didn't. There were, the thing is that Salem, this is the thing about, the Salem Witch Trials is that they're actually very, very rational, educated, intelligent people. We don't normally put that together with witchcraft.
Except for the spectral evidence or whatever it was called.
Well, I know, but this is where I think it's really interesting. If you had kind of a group of young girls who are, twisting their bodies in ways you don't think a human body can be twisted, who are clearly in great distress, who are claiming that they're being, kind of pierced with pins, and are kind of blaming that kind of old woman down the street.
Right.
Listen, this is, I think we call it conversion syndrome nowadays.
Uh-huh.
A mass, we might call it mass hysteria.
Right.
But it's hard to kind of ignore, their distress. It's hard to kind of do. I mean, some people did. I mean, there was a real. I mean, this is what's so fascinating about the trials. There was a real debate about it and dispute about it.
Right.
And there was a judge, Judge Saltonstall, who was the ancestor of someone I had known growing up. Said no. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is like the Salem Witch Trials. I mean, he's like, I'm having no part in this.
Right.
So there are people who, this was a lively kind of source of contestation.
Right.
But there was a sense like don't you have sympathy for these girls? Believe the girls, right? I mean, we're kind of familiar with this language. Believe the woman. When kind of women kind of claim that they're being harmed, shouldn't you believe them?
Right, but with these girls, there was like physical manifestations. You mentioned the spasms and behaving a certain way. And that's where the theory I read, the ergo poisoning, explained why a body would react like that.
Yeah, but I don't even,
What are some other reasons why these girls might have been, I mean, if you accept that sort of as something that had actually happened, these girls like spasming and behaving strangely physically, and it's not this poisoning, which, as I understand, comes from like rotten grains, mostly rye or whatever.
But you didn't see it before, you didn't see it after. It
Right.
all has to do with a group of girls who are like know each other and are familiar with each other. It spreads among their own community. You don't see it elsewhere at this time. You don't see boys doing it. You don't see adults
So it's a
doing it.
skeptical eye on those two individuals themselves.
So what I find most interesting, this is like one of my favorite paragraphs in the whole world ever. So one of these girls was named Ann Putnam. And she was one of the major accusers, and she kind of brought about the hang of some very upstanding citizens in the community. And in 1706, when she's 27 years old, this is like a Puritan girl, a Puritan young woman at this point, and she goes in front of the community in Salem, and she makes a statement, and this is what she says: "I desire to be humble before God for that sad and humbling providence that befell my father's family in the year about 92, that I, then being in my childhood, should, by such a providence of God, be made an instrument for the accusing of several people for grievous crimes, whereby their lives was taken away from them, whom now I have just grounds and good reason to believe they were innocent persons. And it was a great delusion of Satan that deceived me in that sad time, whereby I justly fear that I have been instrumental with others, although ignorantly and unwittingly, to bring upon myself and this land the guilt of innocent blood. Though what was said or done by me against any person, I can truly and uprightly say before God and men, I did it not out of any anger, malice, or ill will to any person, for I had no such thing against any of them. But what I did was ignorantly, being deluded by Satan. And particularly as I was the chief instrument of accusing Goodwife Nurse and her two sisters, I desired to lie in the dust and to be humble forward. And in that I was a cause with others of so sad a calamity to them and their families, for which cause I desired to lie in the dust and earnestly beg forgiveness of God, and from all those unto whom I had given just cause of sorrow and offense, whose relations were taken away or accused." I just think that is a way to give an apology. I desire to lie in the dust. I desire to lie in the
Love
dust.
that. Just as
Isn't
low
that
as you
gorgeous?
can go. Yeah.
But there are people that kind of argue like Satan is in Salem and is actually deluding the girls.
Right.
And that's what she's saying at the end as well.
Right. And that's a pretty convenient, hook to hang your contrition on, to your guilt. I mean, it sounds like somebody working very hard to assuage their guilt for this horrible thing that they've done.
She died shortly after she made that statement.
How old was she when she made the statement?
She was, 27 years old.
And how old was she when she accused
She was
the people?
13
Right.
at that time. So she lived a long life. But one of the things, another kind of factor is that anyone who said that these girls were not speaking the truth would end up accused of witchcraft by them.
Egads.
So I mean, no matter what you want to say is the kind of reason, for what they were suffering from. So whom do they accuse? I mean, what's the pattern in the accusations? It starts out, it's just the way in witchcraft accusations always start. It starts out with the old woman down the street who's kind of bad-tempered, who's poor, who's homeless.
Right.
So it starts out
and
with
lives a solitary life.
Exactly. So it often starts out with them, but then what happens is it goes up the food chain. And more and more people kind of get accused. I mean, it's still kind of disproportionately a higher number of women, were accused. 14 women, 5 men, but men get accused too. The previous minister, in Salem was accused and was hanged, But and as I said, a lot of the most respectable members of Salem, like the people that Ann Putnam had accused, kind of Goody Nurse, they were accused and they were convicted. I mean, these are, Hawthorne has that wonderful kind of short story about, Goodman Brown. But like the most respectable people, the people you would most trust. I mean, they were ultimately the people that were accused. Finally, the wife of the governor of Massachusetts, raised some questions about what the girls were doing, and they accused her. And that was the end of it. You don't accuse the governor's wife.
No. So did this stay mostly in Salem? And if so, why didn't it spread to surrounding communities?
Yeah, no, it was very much. And again, the Salem is not what we know as Salem. I mean, and actually, none of this happened in Salem, the town, in the beautiful city of Salem. When that gets all the tourist dollars based upon this, it happened what's known as Salem Village, which is a whole kind of cluster of towns, that are have Salem on the eastern border, But as I say, I lived, for a lot of my childhood in one called Boxford. But Andover. I mean, a lot of kind of, Danvers. I mean, actually, the town called Danvers was actually the epicenter. That's what was really most happening. And it's a completely unattractive place, kind of where there are, disintegrating shopping malls and, kind of throughways going through it. You can still see Rebecca Nurse's house. So there was actually a fairly kind of wide expanse of territory, where, people who were, where the people lived who were getting accused and were the accusers, kind of were. But it's all kind of in the North Shore, of Boston, and this was happening.
Right. But it didn't spread out beyond that.
No, but there had been cases in Boston, kind of shortly beforehand. There had been cases in Western Massachusetts. There had been cases beforehand in other places, cases in Connecticut. But the case in Boston was particularly interesting. I'm always fascinated about this one because the woman accused was an Irish Catholic and who spoke the Irish language. And so one does wonder, to what's going on with accusing her of kind of witchcraft, but everything that you see kind of with the Salem Witch Trials, you see kind of with her. This exact same nature of the complaints, the thing about being stuck by needles, the same type of prosecution, the involvement of Increase Mather and Cotton Mather, who are these two ministers, Congregationalist ministers.
Can we stop right there? I love those names so much.
Oh, I know.
Cotton Mather, and I'm guessing the brother, Increase.
His father, Increase Mather. I know these wonderful Puritan names.
Yeah.
So they are the most prominent, or among the kind of most prominent ministers of the time, affiliated with Harvard College. So, and they're kind of writing. Everyone is writing treatises about this.
Right.
So we have an enormous literature that's being produced about this at this time. In Massachusetts.
So there's examples. You just give examples of these witch hunts, sort of in surrounding communities. But did any of them sort of reach the fever peak of the mass hysteria you mentioned?
See, that's what you don't have. It's individual cases here and there.
Right.
But then that's where Salem is distinctive. It becomes, even to this day, this is the point of reference for all of us of a mass hysteria.
Right.
Kind of witch hunting. I mean, that's where it enters the vernacular. It's because of that model it enters the vernacular of kind of how we refer to this type of phenomenon.
It's still used all the time.
Exactly.
And it's probably being used more lately.
Exactly.
And this whole era of new McCarthyism.
But the only good thing I would say is that kind of after it happened, everyone, remember too that a lot of the people who were accused of witchcraft, 55 people confessed, and they were not tortured. So a lot of people are generally confused by this. Like, why are all these people confessing? And people, if you were skeptical of what was going on, people would say, but that person confessed.
So they confessed and lived?
They would. Somehow they had a notion they would kind of live if they confessed, but lots of times they would get hanged anyway.
Right.
A lot of people kind of died. A lot of people were just kept in prison for a long time, and then after the craze was over, they kind of were released.
And was there a date when the craze was sort of officially over?
Yeah, the day that the governor was out of town. Governor Phipps, he was off dealing with the French and Indian conflicts.
Right.
He was actually in New York. I mean, dealing with Fort Edward kind of issues. There, but he gets back home. I'm like, oh my God, my wife has been accused of witchcraft, and he had actually set up this special court to deal with the situation in Salem. So he's no innocent in this. There had been a kind of special court, deal because oh my God, there's a sense of all this trouble of witchcraft and but then he got out of town. But then he gets back into town, and he sees it's completely out of control. And so he's he says, listen, no more of the spectral evidence being admitted. And then that's the end of it. And then in a short amount of time, everyone is let out of prison. And people, and then they do. After just a short number of years, they do apologize. Kind of the authorities, in Salem have a kind of official day of mourning. Where the whole, the whole state, kind of has a kind of act of contrition, kind of about this.
And how soon did that start?
That was very shortly thereafter, just 4 years after.
And how far after that was the first souvenir sold?
It took a while. I think one very important intervening factor is Nathaniel Hawthorne. Who is descendant of families kind of involved as judges, who lived in Salem. He worked at the beautiful Custom House. You can go visit. He was very handsome, and he's one of the greatest American writers.
Yeah, no, I don't know that short story you mentioned.
Oh yeah, young Goodman Brown. It's one of the most famous of his short stories. He's a great short story writer. But young Goodman Brown is like a Puritan and a young man, and he has a new young wife. But she wants him to stay home this special night, and but he's like, no, I have to go and meet someone, and he's going to join a coven in the woods. I don't want to tell you what happens in the end.
Okay, good.
Because it's a short story, it's available online, and it's really fun to read.
Oh, good.
But
Thanks.
it is a very there's also a Native American aspect to it. He does make that connection between understandings of witchcraft and understandings of Native American paganism.
Right.
So he writes a whole book called The House of the Seven Gables.
Uh-huh.
And you can go. The House of the Seven Gables is a great house to visit in Salem. It's so spooky looking, and so his book, he connects it with the Salem Witch Trials, and so he's a lot of his of course the Scarlet Letter, which isn't about the witch trials, but it's about Puritan society.
Yeah.
So he and people kind of read these books. Even today they read them in high school. Or junior high school. Yeah. So this gets people's imagination going because they're so. And you read the stories, and then you go to Salem, and you can go visit all the places related to it.
Right. And you mentioned the Native American tribes and the paganism, and there was the Abenaki tribe there, and also when mentioned in the things I read about this was like a freed slave, Tituba or something.
Tituba, I know, she's one of the most famous figures in all of this.
Yeah. Was there possibly a racial element to the way all the shit went down?
First, one question is what, Tituba also had a husband or partner, whose name was Indian John. That's how he was referred to. So this is one of the great mysteries. Maurice Condé, the great Caribbean writer, has written a whole novel about this, which is very, very interesting. But Reverend Paris, the minister at Salem, had he went to Harvard College, but his family had a plantation down in Barbados, and so he spent a certain amount of time there, and then he comes back to Massachusetts and kind of gets the job in Salem, and he brings Tituba and Indian John with him. And so they're coming with him from Barbados. So one of the $1 million questions is, what, quote, race or ethnicity kind of are these people? Are they of African ancestry? Or, are they kind of, are they indigenous people from Barbados?
Right.
But also there would be indentured servants sent over there. So it's very, very complicated, kind of, and there's no clear kind of definition of what their ethnicity was. But Tituba, she's really the very origin of kind of this craze. She's identified with kind of performing certain rituals with these girls, and fortune telling. Again, the same type of fortune telling that would be identified with Halloween. And using kind of wax and, to kind of see the image of your future husband. And so there's some spooky occult stuff going on, and she's identified with that. She's in prison. She makes the first accusations. But then at a certain point, she's never hanged. And she just disappears.
Huh.
She's released. We have no idea what happened to her.
Huh.
So she's such a mysterious figure.
Yeah. And so
she was a servant too, these are children, these are servants, these are people children who are servants, these are people who are under other people's influence.
Yeah. And with active imaginations and not necessarily the strong moral compass that somebody might have at an older age. Kids are a little bit loose cannons.
Well, there should be good Puritan girls. You would think, but
I suspect then as now that it's a long path of sort of getting them to toe the line. That they're born wilder than they become.
I kind of go with. I always kind of believe in taking text at face value to a certain extent. This is why I'm a literature person and artist scholar. But I tend to kind of go with what Ann Putnam said in that quotation that I read to you.
Okay.
That it was not that she was purposely kind of trying to. She says it was not malice. I believe she thought, that, she was caught up in this.
So, okay.
I believe she, that she felt that what she was saying was true at that time.
Right. Great. I have a different interpretation. But I'm mostly interested that you as an academic tend to take text at face value.
Well, I listen, I shouldn't say that. Obviously there are certain things I would not take at face value, but I'm always interested in text. I'm always interested in interpreting text. And listen, I work on literature. In literature, by definition, you take it at face value. It's a story. It's not history. But right. I've written about a lot of historical text as well. And I do recognize, of course, you can kind of misrepresent things, and people who write down the text or write the text can
people have a vested
unpurposely.
interest in telling history how they want.
Of course, I kind of recognize it. But that being the case, I actually do tend to think that most people, not all people and not all circumstances, but I think most people when they do even bad things, they think they're doing it for a good reason.
Oh boy. I'm with you. I think about right now the current state of affairs.
Yeah.
My neighbors, wonderful people,
Exactly.
Trumpers,
Exactly.
they're getting their
Exactly.
facts from a whole different place than I'm getting my facts.
Exactly.
I don't think that they're morally bankrupt.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
they're engaged in what I see as morally bankrupt behavior, but that they're making good choices with bad information.
Yeah. But that's why I just believe in taking very seriously what people say.
Right.
Even if you're going to dismiss it, I still think it's listen, even with the president of this country, it's not that I believe kind of what he says, but I think it's interesting to listen the way he puts it. I think there's something to be learned from that. And
Any idea what?
Sorry?
What is there to be learned from the way he puts these things?
I think it reflects a certain perspective and an ideology, even if he's just listen, sometimes when he's just flagrantly kind of, inflating the number of people kind of there for his inauguration, that's pretty kind of transparent, kind of what's going on there. But at other times, he will say things that kind of reflect just a different way of thinking about politics, than liberals have.
Sure.
And that his supporters will very much identify with,
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes, I do think that, those of us who are not Trump supporters, tend to dismiss, what people say, too quickly. And we might actually want to listen a bit more and take a bit more seriously, like what your neighbors actually say. I'm not saying QAnon, I'm not saying, kind of stuff like that. But even if with stuff that seems as clearly kind of false, to kind of listen to it and say, what's the meta message here? What's kind of real? What are this person really articulating?
Which is great. Yeah. What's the meta message? Well, that's not necessarily taking it at face value. That's.
Listen, I was just talking about there's a yellow bird on your shoulder. I would not take that at face value. That's the source of all the trouble that happened here. And I think one needs to be kind of skeptical about. And I would that people and the judges had been more skeptical of that.
Right.
But I still, but as someone who is trying to understand the situation, I'm interested by what they claim that they're seeing. I think that gives you certain hints, about kind of what was going on.
And what's your relationship to the supernatural, to spirits and specters and that kind of stuff?
In terms of the occult, again, I would kind of. It's hard to say. I mean, listen, I don't practice anything occult. I mean, I don't. I kind of wish. I've always wished I would see a ghost, but it sadly has not happened.
Right.
I mean, occultism, as we know it, is very much influenced by kind of the occultism of the late 19th, especially early 20th centuries. Right. So that has a different history. And I know the historical origins of that. I know where that's coming from.
Right.
So I kind of, when you see something that has a history, you tend to kind of believe less that it's, it's really existing throughout all of time, here.
Yeah.
But I think ghosts are a fascinating topic. I mean, as I say, what I do with my students, is that, we work through these stories and we kind of see what's going on. And I think that there's a truth in the stories. It may not be a truth that there's a ghost, but there isn't. And I don't want to be like a skeptic and just rejecting that or debunking it. I want to see what the truth there is in it.
I think you can be a skeptic without certainty. Like, I don't believe it, but I don't say it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're running out of time.
Okay.
I get one more question, I guess, and then probably another one after that. You're a writer, as most academics are. Have you ever written a ghost story?
Oh, it's so funny you asked it. I subscribe to a magazine, and they have a contest for kind of writing a kind of ghost story. And I've always been, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to do that. But so the short answer is no. But the more interesting answer. And it's interesting you asked this question. I do at some point want to write about the Salem Witch Trials. I mean, listen, I work in the European Middle Ages. I work in French, I work in Latin. This isn't my area of expertise. But I am obsessed by this topic. And so I've done a lot of research into it. I've spoken about it, before. But I have thought that the way that I think I would have to approach it is through fiction.
Right.
I would like, because obviously a huge number of people have written kind of fiction about, the Salem Witch Trials, but I not that I've read every single thing they've read, which I should do before I do this, but I think that they get it really wrong. Right. I want to do something like what Umberto Eco did with The Name of the Rose, which is kind of basically glorified plagiarism of the primary sources.
Right.
I think it's a wonderful model of how to kind of write fiction. So I would like to kind of write a novel about the Salem Witch Trials that was really very, very closely based on the original sources, the original documents, and really very historically based. I'm very fascinated by theology, so I would want to kind of bring that in. So the answer is no ghost story, but I do want to write a Salem Witch Trial novel.
Great. I cannot wait to read that.
I look forward to writing it.
Here's the last question. So later tonight, Halloween night, you're going to go to your house. Will you turn off all the lights and lock the door, or will you be there passing out candy?
Oh, of course. I'm there passing out candy. I love seeing all the little princesses and dinosaurs and gremlins or whatever.
I do too.
I think it's one of my favorite holidays, of course.
That's so sweet to hear. All right. Well, thank you so much, Professor Dr. Karen Sullivan, for coming on for the second time. Thanks to the Epicurean for giving us this beautiful nook in the back of their fabulous store here in wonderful Rhinecliff. Thanks to Matt Rosenberg, who's here tonight, who started this whole thing, and his partner in crime, the producer extraordinaire, Jen Hammoud. Everybody have a great Friday and fabulous weekend, and happy Halloween.